because she's an amazing photographer, but also has this really strong scientific background. So in the dead of winter, I think it's a great time to start looking at beautiful spring pictures and pictures of insects, thinking about the bigger picture. And so I am going to hand things over to Kathy first. Kathy is going to tell us a little bit about the climate season and some more things happening at IU Northwest. I do want to tell everyone and remind you that this is being recorded and will be available later. We're going to ask you to keep your cameras off and yourself muted, please. And then we'll take questions at the end. Okay, Kathy?
Hi, thanks, Erin. My name is Kathy Harkin, and I teach in performing arts. And working with Erin this whole year on the Sustainability Speaker Series, we decided to collaborate because the Department of Performing Arts has decided for this year to put together a full season of plays about the climate. So we're calling it the climate season. And we just announced our cast for the spring show, which is called A Chorus of Oysters. And it's 12 very short plays, 5 to 7 minutes long, all about the climate and the climate crisis from a lot of different voices from around the world. So I'm hoping that it is interesting to people in a different way than the performances that we had in the fall. And we also have part of the climate season is coordinating community events with Corey Hagelberg in the Calumet Artist Residency. And in March, we have a winter sewing workshop that he's also going to teach people how to create a low tunnel just to explore ways to extend your growing season. So those are some of the events that are coming up. The performances are late March and early April. So we're excited to hear about the photography today because we actually have people playing characters that are insects and pollinators and all the kinds of things that Susan takes pictures of.
Awesome. So Susan, are you ready to begin? Okay.
Hello, everybody.
I think you muted yourself again.
So
There you go.
I'm going to share my screen. And can everybody see my screen? Okay, excellent. Let me get this full screen then. Okay, so as you heard, my name is Susan Kirt Alterio, and I'm known at Indiana University by my official last name. So put it in there for everyone, so you're not, so nobody's confused. And I am teaching adjunct, as you heard, this semester at Indiana University Northwest. So I'm really excited to be expanding and learning how to teach at this new university for me. And I've been having a blast so far. And we're going to be looking at conservation photography, and specifically in your backyard. And so I open up with a picture that has been used a little bit around here the last couple of years of a monarch caterpillar on milkweed at the Indiana Dunes State Park. So I really love this image and seeing everything that it shows. But that's the only dune picture you're going to see, or lakefront picture, I should say. And I want to talk a little bit more about conservation photography. And it's often described as nature photography with a mission, as we heard in my introduction. And it's trying to take photographs and advocating for conserving nature and wild places and showing people or helping people understand what they can do to help nature in their own backyards, in their own region, or halfway around the world. And the nice thing about photography is it crosses boundaries. You don't need to be able to read the same language in order to get the same impact with that photograph. The photograph is universal. And so that's one of the great things that I like about taking images. And here's the problem with conservation. We always think it's someplace else, and we think we have to hop on these airplanes and travel to these far off distant lands in order to conserve something. That's where all the interesting stuff is. And so here I am, I'm in an airplane over savannas in Africa. That's obviously where I have to go to get the interesting photograph, right? And get the interesting story. And yeah, I can get pretty pictures. But you know what? I like giraffes, but I can guarantee you there's about 5 billion giraffe pictures out there. And so this is a nice nature photograph for me, but it's not really telling much of a story. A story that other people are telling from this trip that I took out there a few years back in 2018 actually has to do with this one of these guys right here, which is the African wild dog, of which they're endangered in the continent of Africa. There's about 6,000 left. It's kind of cool, right? And they were introducing them to the park I was at, Argonne National Park in Mozambique. And they were just in an area where they're getting acclimated. So I was lucky enough to see them. Would not have seen these otherwise. And so this is still just a nice picture though, a nice nature photography picture, because I'm not there on the ground telling this long story. And it's a beautiful story. I've been following it through the last couple of years, how they're acclimating and how they're breeding and all the stuff that they're doing to help out this ecosystem at this national park. And that's a conservation story, but it's not one I'm telling. Instead, I like to focus a little closer to home. And the great thing about that, I don't have to go to Africa to see a savanna, which is scattered trees with grassland underneath it. I can go in my own backyard, basically. And within 10 minutes of Indiana University Northwest, I can be in the savannas. I can be in these dune and swale ecosystems that you're seeing here online right now. And I like the urban conservation part of it because we think that there's no nature in urban areas. Yet Chicago region has some of the highest number of natural areas, high quality natural areas as any place in the United States. It's just scattered in all these little pockets or islands throughout the region. And I really like this image because it tells a story. It shows that this very rare, globally imperiled habitat type are black oak savannas, which are the trees that you're seeing. There's not much of it left, but you can see a nice representation of it here. But it's on top of a globally rare landform, dune and swale, otherwise known as ridge and pan, where you have these old dune ridges from back when the center strip of land here, that was at the lake. And then behind that dune, you would have had a wetland. And then you had another dune, you had a wetland. And so as Lake Michigan shrunk, you got these parallel lines. Most of them have been filled in though. It's really easy to take a bulldozer and plop all the sand on these islands and fill in the wetlands. And you can see that happened right behind here. You got a little bit of the Indiana Toll Road. You have the industry, and that's what happened to a lot of these. But they're beautiful places and they host a ton of really high quality natural plants and animals, very high quality areas. And this is probably one of my favorite plants that I can find in our area dune and swales. So here are the showy lady slipper orchids from Gary, Indiana. And most people do not associate Gary with just pristine, not pristine, but really beautiful natural areas home to lots and lots and lots of rare plants and animals. But they're there, you just have to know where to look. Okay? But my focus is not on the plants today, which is hard for me to say as a botanist. It's not on the plants. Okay? Instead, I want to talk a little bit about how photography can be used to share a story. And so the next 2 slides are going to be pictures that I took with the National Parks Conservation Association and Save the Dunes. And every year we have an organization, the SCA, the Student Conservation Association, which hires college students or people that just graduated from college, hint, hint, any college student out there. And they go to different areas across the nation and they help out conserving our natural lands. So you could be doing this on Nature Conservancy property at the Indiana Dunes State Park, which is where this picture was taken, the national parks, the forest preserve districts, and you go around to different areas and you help preserve. And these are 3 people who were out there at the state park controlling invasive species, both with hand tools, you have power tools, and then you can use herbicide. And so what they, in this case, what they're doing is they're taking tools, they're cutting down invasive brush and then dabbing selectively onto the cut stem an herbicide. I'm a big proponent of herbicide in restorations, as long as it's done properly. You're going to see an example a little bit later of when it was not done properly. And that's really sad, okay? And we'll talk about how the indiscriminate use of pesticides and herbicides can actually hurt a lot of animals. All right, and then here's another example, same group, different year. But another thing to think about with this SCA, the Student Conservation Association, is they do have an all-women's crew here in the Chicago area. And in this case, they went out in Indiana Dunes National Park at the Great Marsh, as you can see on here, which is basically Cole's Bog, where they were, which is named after one of the founders of the ecology movement. So he came up with this idea of plant succession, and he came up with this idea as he moved inland from Lake Michigan and saw how all the plant communities changed over time. And so he was from the University of Chicago, and they named the marsh after him. But you can see them planting native plants in an area that used to be cattails that were killed by herbicide. And so they're replacing them right away so that native plants can take over, not invasive. But you get like this idea of what people can do to help out the environment and some different organizations that you can use to help. So these are nice uplifting stories. We're seeing conservation in action. But you also have to think that there's always something going on, okay? And things that may not work out the greatest. I do want to point out the background picture for this of lupin is not from the prairie being talked about here, which is Bowl Prairie. This is out by Rockford. And this is a prairie owned by the airport, the Kankakee Airport, and they're expanding because Amazon and a bunch of other places, companies are putting in more businesses there. And so they need more runways to accommodate all that shipping traffic. The problem is they have a remnant gravel prairie. And prairies, as we're going to find out, are very, very rare nowadays. And it's one of the most endangered ecosystems on the face of the planet. And when we look at it, 99.9% of high quality prairie in the state of Illinois, which was once known as the Prairie State, is gone. But on this airport ground, they have a remnant. And a group called the National Natural Land Institute has been managing this prairie for 50 years. And because it's gravel, it's even more rare. There's less than 15 acres left in the entire state because they were bulldozed down or they were mined for gravel. Very high quality. And they found one of our new endangered species on the endangered species list, the rusty patch bumblebee lives out there. And nobody knew they were planning to build a road right through this high quality remnant prairie until somebody saw bulldozers out there. And so lots of injunctions went out and lots of movement happened this past fall, in late summer, early fall. And they were able to halt the destruction of this prairie for temporarily. There's an injunction on it until March 1st, a couple weeks from now. And here's a loophole apparently in the Endangered Species Act. You cannot destroy this prairie in the summertime because the bee is active and flying around. It's protected. But in the wintertime, when it hibernates underground, it's fair game and you can bulldoze them. Weird, right? I never knew that there were loopholes like that. And so there's a bunch of people trying to prevent this prairie from being destroyed. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but there's a big movement. If you go to billbowlprairie.org, there's a lot of ways listed there that you can help or reach out to people, say like, hey, I think it's horrible that you're trying to do this. But they got a setback just 2 days ago on February 7th that says that a lawsuit that's in place right now should be dismissed. So we'll see what happens. We'll probably know in a few weeks if this is going to be stay as a prairie or if it's going to be a paved road. So there's a lot of people working on it, big conservation photography action happening with this. I'm not involved with it, but I wanted to share some of the things happening in our area. And there's another reason I want to share that, and this is kind of exciting. This is just down the road from the university again in East Chicago. And there is ArcelorMittal, the steel company. They sold most of their belonging or properties in the last year or so, but they kept their research and development center right by the Gary Airport. And that's where this red dot is on the map. Okay, so not far from us. And I put a map up of the tallgrass prairie. That's the green. It's not the best map. It doesn't, we do have it here. About 15% of Indiana was tallgrass prairie, but we've met the same fate as Illinois. We have less than 99 point some percent of our prairie left. Very little amount. And I went out there in beginning of October, collect some seed with permission. And I picked a stalk of blazing star and I found this moth on it. I'm like, snapped a picture, plopped it up on Instagram, and that started the ball rolling. I didn't know what I took a picture of. It's apparently a globally listed imperiled species of moth that is remnant dependent. Only eats blazing star as a caterpillar. And there was only 15 recorded sightings between 2001 and 2010 in the 5 counties listed, where there used to be more prairie. So this is a pretty exciting thing. The company is very excited. I just got a rough draft for an article that we're putting together for the ArcelorMittal company. And here's the moth. It's tops an inch long, 2.5 centimeters long. And it is brown and it really wants to hide on those dry seed heads. And you can see the moth that's on the seed head. And it's really hard to see. I didn't see it till after I had broken off a stalk. Blended right in. It was crazy. And this is what the plant looks like in the summer out at ArcelorMittal. And this is a great story because a person at the company, Matt, decided like, hey, I think we may have something interesting here. Contacted the Indiana DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, and they had the Field Museum of Chicago come out, and they said, hey, stop mowing this. They've been mowed for almost 50 years. You have a remnant on top of that dune and swale I just talked about. So this is we do have remnants that are grasslands that don't have tree cover, like we saw before. And it's full of rare plants for our area, as well as some endangered animals in the form of insects, which is pretty cool. But just like what I was talking about with Rockford Prairie, it is privately owned, and they can do whatever they want with it. But right now they're super excited about what's happening here. So we're trying to keep it that way. And one big way is through photography. And we've been putting up the photographs throughout the main building on that particular compound. And one problem with the moth is when it lays its eggs, it just drops them in the grass you're seeing here. And that means when you do these burns, which are done to help keep the grassland a grassland instead of forest, it burns the eggs up. Bit of a bummer, right? And so if this whole area was burned, there would literally be no more moth. It would be extinct at this particular preserve, the 7 acres that they have here. But they're doing it so they burn half at one time, and that is because they want to conserve insects. This is not a problem historically, because you had so much grassland, they would recolonate, but now we just have little itty bitty patches. So if it's gone from here, it'll probably be gone forever. And that leads me to these bear patches. So a few years ago, they did have a crew out there. They had hired a company, and they mistook that blazing star that I just showed you for an invasive plant called purple loosestrife. And they not only sprayed the blazing star, but they sprayed everything around these plants. And so the next year, which is when this was taken, shows lots of bare ground. Okay. And can you imagine confusing this plant with this one? It happens. This is an incorrect use of herbicide. And it probably killed a lot of those plants, but they switched companies and they filled in those bare areas. Lots of plants got put in, both from the site, grown from the site, or bought. And they've hired a company that actually knows their native plants. So when they kill off just the purple loosestrife you see here, they're doing it a lot more selectively. And I like this picture. Not only do you see a person herbiciding in the background, but you also have one of our invasive insects, the Chinese praying mantis, who is definitely a female. She must have a lot of eggs inside her. She's very fat at the moment. And she doesn't care that monarchs are supposed to taste bad because she's eating one of them. And monarchs are being considered for the endangered species list because they have decreased 80+% in the last 20, 30 years in number. And to keep the ball rolling, to keep everyone excited at Arcelor, I'm going to propose another article later on, and we have found the American bumblebee there. Took these pictures in 2020 on nodding wild onion, which is a great plant because this is what Chicago was named after. It's named after the indigenous word for wild onion, or stinking onion, stinking place, because it has a strong onion smell. So yeah, it's great to know that Chicago is named after an onion, right? But this is happening again and again and again with a lot of our native species, including that rusty patch bumblebee I talked about earlier. They're finding in the last 20, 30 years, many insects have decreased in large numbers. In this case, this bee, which you can see, I took captions from a site called iNaturalist, and iNaturalist is a citizen science site that's really easy for everybody to use, and it's great if you don't know what you're taking a picture of, because you have experts on there that will help you identify them, and they will also give you suggestions on what your particular organism might be. So I strongly recommend, if you ever kind of curious on what you're looking at, to download this app, and you can just upload things right off your cell phone or your computer. But as we're seeing with a lot of bees and other insects, this has declined almost 90% in the last 20 years. And this was once the most common bumblebee in the entire US, occurring in 47 out of the 48 lower the continental US. And it was the most commonly observed bumblebee through 2002, not too long ago. But now it's being considered for listing under the Endangered Species Act. Starting in October, it's under a 1-year review. It's decreased that much. Again, habitat loss and the use of insecticides and pesticides have really knocked these for a loop. They're now extinct in multiple states, I think 8 states, and have decreased up to 99% in some states. So they're barely found. And their numbers are just plunging. So it's pretty cool that they are finding this out here at this small little remnant, surrounded by industry. It's surrounded by the airport, East Chicago, and Shell corporations, places like that. So we just got to keep the company interested. But I wanted to get a little bit even closer to home. And so this is where Save the Dunes comes into play. And Save the Dunes in 2021 put out the Living in the Dunes Guide, which I was one of the main photographers on, but by no means the only photographer. And this is a great resource because it tells you what you can plant in your yard that's native to our area. If you plant native plants, you'll attract the native insects. If you plant a non-native plant, a plant that is from another part of the world, it's not going to help out the native insects that much. And so One example is I love my geraniums. I put geraniums out in my yard every year. But if I look at the leaves, nothing is ever chewing those leaves. Okay? That means it's not a very good plant for the insects and other animals found in my yard. But research is showing that as long as at least 30% or more, or 70%, I am confusing my percentages right now, but as long as a lot of your yard is in native plants, you can still have some of those non-natives that you may like. I have magnolia trees that came with my yard. I like my magnolias. They're not from around here. Nothing's eating their leaves, but I'm not going to cut the trees down either. I think they're really pretty in the spring. But most of my yard, I'm trying to get into native plants. And this is a homeowner's guide to help you do that. And you think, boy, I don't have a yard, so why do I even care? You could have a patio off an apartment, and you can put some native plants into pots, and you will attract natives. You'll attract these native insects to your patio. They've shown even in high rises in cities, you could have a pot out on your balcony and you're on the 20th floor, and yet you'll still get native pollinators finding that patio pot. It's pretty cool. But this is nice because not only do they tell you what they like as adults, which is what you're seeing with these butterflies, it'll tell you what the caterpillar needs to eat. And this is important because a lot of times what the caterpillar needs, the immature stage of the insect, is different than what the adult needs. And if you don't have both types of plant in your yard, you're not going to get those insects that you may want, like these butterflies. And if I go to the guide, which is downloadable as a PDF, and I just didn't have time to put this in my PowerPoint, you can see that they'll give you different design ideas for yards. And if you're in an association or in some sort of area, you don't have your own garden, maybe wherever you live has some community gardens or curbsides by roads, and you can suggest putting in some of these areas. Okay. And you're like, why do I care about the insects? I bet you anything, several of us are thinking, why do I care about this? It's pretty common because people are like, oh boy, the only good insect's a dead insect, right? They fly around my head. I don't particularly like them. Okay, butterflies are kind of cute, but why do I really care? And that's what we want to get into. So this is my driveway. And when I moved in here in 2013, it wasn't mostly native plants like you see here. I think I have one non-native in there. It was daylilies, which are impossible to get rid of. I'm still killing daylilies. And this summer, I'm still going to be killing daylilies. Those things take over. And they're daylilies and hostas. I still got a lot of hostas. But they're not really attracting the insects. Okay. And spent years hauling water out to the end of my driveway. And it's starting to look pretty nice now. And one of the best things that I enjoy about this is the fact that these plants are covered in butterflies starting from midsummer on. It's beautiful. Every time a car drives by, all these butterflies flutter up. And one of the reasons they come here is I am the only house on my street that has these native plants in their yard. I am the only place that these insects can go to find places to lay eggs, for their young to eat, and plants that they can get nectar and pollen and food on when they're adults. And when we think about the monarch butterfly, you can see in the corner right there, that's in this particular planting, by the way, from a couple of years ago. They need milkweed in order to lay their eggs on. And so I have some milkweeds here in the back. I have swamp milkweed or rose milkweed. People are starting to not use swamp as much because it seems like it should live in wet areas, but this is really pretty dry. And my problem is the caterpillars. I get too many of them because I'm the only yard that has milkweed. And I have milkweed elsewhere in my yard too, don't worry. And so I actually have to pick them off every week, and I take them to local preserves. They know about it. And I put them on their milkweeds because otherwise I wouldn't have any plants at all. Isn't that crazy though? I mean, I like the monarch caterpillars, but sometimes seeing this many all together in person is a bit much. But you don't want to just have the milkweeds because they don't like to form their chrysalis to turn into an adult on the milkweed plant because they're trying to hide from predators. So the caterpillars crawl to other plants in this planting, especially the goldenrod right here. I don't know why, but I've seen tons of chrysalises just on that goldenrod alone. And they're going to emerge, and then they find plenty of food for them to eat. Okay. And I get tons of other butterflies, moths, bees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just go out to the end of my yard and I take pictures, and people look at me when they drive by in their cars all the time, but it's really pretty. All right. And so how do I do it? Well, first off, I have a big yard, so I collect a lot of seed from places that I'm allowed to, as well as from my own yard. I clean the seed sometimes. I'll scatter it. I love scattering it over the snow because I can see where it is. And I try to do it when it's going to snow again to prevent a lot of seed loss to animals. I love feeding the animals. I love the fact they liked all the seeds. I'm trying to get them through winter, but I don't need them to eat all the native seed that I put out there. But I'm slowly getting rid of that lawn that doesn't support a lot of animals. I want to get more of it into these native plants. I'm showing you prairie here. We're also planting shrubs and trees and everything else. It's supposed to be a forest where I live, just not turning it all into forest. But you also have to be aware that some seeds, like wild geranium seeds, they catapult their seeds. So if I want their seeds, I have to put them in little baggies before the seeds are ripe, so I can collect them. I got some seeds in the bottom there. Other plants, I'm actually competing with the ants because a lot of our spring woodland flowers, they have these white structures on them, the lysosomes. Hopefully I said that right. And it's like this sugary protein-rich source that they bring back to their nests, feed it to their young, their larvae, and then they toss the seeds into their garbage dump, basically, which is full of nutrients. And basically they're burying the seeds in fertilizer and spreading the plants, which is pretty cool. But you can see that I can spread seeds, and then sometimes you can go and collect the plants or buy the plants and bring them home and plant them from different organizations. Okay. So some other things you can see, here's another yard that has a lot of native plants in their front yard. So these can look really pretty. And they don't have to look really wild. You can put structure into these native plantings. And I do see a lot more native plantings with businesses as the years go on, which is great. But you can, sorry, my dog is walking in. I can hear his ears flapping. But if you get brush in the way or you're trying to get rid of some things, you can always have great bonfires. You can remove the non-native plants. I do recommend giving off people or getting out young people into preserves. This is me back in the early 80s, out on a prairie learning about bull snakes. And you can also have tree planting. So this is at Chicago State University, and we're doing a big tree planting with open lands to get more native plants onto campus. And I would recommend that if you are trying for a ground cover and it's not, you have a bigger area especially, try to go for a native ground cover. I have spent so much of my time pulling out pretty much what you see here, some garlic mustard, but mostly periwinkle and English ivy. The English ivy is what you see growing on like brick buildings, really pretty. Nothing eats these things. And they're going to be coming back for years to come. And so I'm taking these to a composting center. And I always say you don't know if you have a true restoration until you find a tire. And so when I found tires in my yard a couple years ago, I'm like, yes, really is a restoration. And I joke about it, but that is one of the big issues with our natural areas here in the Chicago region and beyond, is that apparently it must be expensive to recycle tires because they get dumped into the forest preserves and the nature preserves everywhere. And there are a lot of work days that you'll see that it's for tire removal. So, but if you look around at different organizations around here, I guarantee you'll find one every year. But we want to look at some of the insects. So insects, they're beautiful. We just see them and they're really tiny and we don't really look that close to them. And we say like, oh, how can I like an insect? I just like the cute and fuzzy animals. I like the mammals. But look at how cute and fuzzy all of these different bees are. These are all from my yard. In fact, because I have some native plants right up against my driveway, I took this one. I didn't even step off my driveway. Just stood right there, clicked away. And they're absolutely gorgeous. And there's some bees that if you plant native plants, you'll get things that you don't expect. This little cranesbill minor bee is in the center of the wild geranium. Cranesbill is another name for wild geranium. And I didn't have wild geranium in my yard. They're native to the area though. So I planted some. And what's cool is this is the only plant that this bee will pollinate. And if you don't have this particular plant, you won't have this bee species. And it's tiny. These are little bees. I got a macro lens. So a lot of these are blown up quite large compared to what they are in real life. And I just find it so cool. And the plant that you see right here, just the center of the flower, that's that catapulting seed I mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to get more of these plants in to help out some of the wildlife. All right. And if you have questions on what some of these insects are, we can go back at the end of the talk. I'm just trying to show some of that diversity. And these are pictures from my yard, except for this one, because I like how I have this insect in my yard, a soldier beetle, but I loved how this one is just coated in pollen, showing that pollination. And this is from another nature preserve. And one thing I find really cool about insects is the fact that they can mimic other animals. So this one at the top, you may look at that briefly and think, ooh, that's a bald-faced hornet. That's what I thought at first too, until I looked at the picture. This is a fly. This is a mimic of the bald-faced hornet. But if you were a predator, you're a bird, are you really going to want to eat that? You think it's something that's going to sting you. So you leave it alone. And the same thing happens down here. This is actually a fly also, but it's called a bee fly because it's mimicking a bee. Again, bees sting, so birds will tend to avoid eating you. Another thing I want to mention, even though I've talked a lot about butterflies, they're beautiful. They're horrible pollinators for the most part. They're really going after the nectar, that sugary syrup that plants make. What's really, really, really going to help out the plants, have reproduction, have seed to propagate, is the moths. And you can see how the scales or how fuzzy the moths are. There's a moth face. Look at this one. I love this one. Stowaway moth. Okay. And so, but why do I care, right? I'm like, why do I care about these things? Well, if you care about birds, you should care about the fact that it is estimated globally that there's 40%, it's estimated there may be up to 40% less individual insects on the face of this planet than they were 40 years ago. And they're declining at a rapid rate. And that's tying in with the birds. And these birds, it is estimated we should have about 3 billion more birds in the United States than we did in and it's been declining appreciably since 1970. Okay. And they're showing you in this graph, and in the other version, there are links to where I got some of these statistics. You can see that the decline in different bird species, especially those grassland birds, if there's no grasslands, over 99% are gone. How are you going to have grassland birds? right? And the grasslands are beautiful. This is a restoration in Illinois of the Schulenburg Prairie at the Morton Arboretum. Even restorations can be beautiful. I mean, just gorgeous. And you need certain amount of these grasslands, which are mostly flowering plants with grasses in there, in order to have these grassland birds. So we're getting all these declines. But why? How does that tie in with this decline in insects? Okay, we're going to start off with the hummingbird here. This is a ruby-throated hummingbird. The males have red feathers that they can flash at you, and you can just see a couple of those feathers right here. And one of the reasons we care about birds is because we're part of the flyway. And there's migratory routes for birds, and the Chicago area is in two flyways. We have the Atlantic flyway that goes across a diagonal, and then we have the Mississippi flyway, so all the birds that come up the Mississippi River and up through our area. And when we look at the hummingbird, we can see where it likes to be for breeding, to have nests, and we can see where it likes to go winter. Okay, migration and wintering down, and they're like the true snowbirds. A lot of the birds we see here in the summer are snowbirds. They don't want to be up here in winter. And even something as tiny as the hummingbird, they fly across the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of them die and they become fish food. But they're willing to make this journey. I mean, who would really want to leave Central and South America to come up here every summer? That's a huge journey. That's thousands of miles. And it's because we have insects in large part. So we have these insects, and when we look at the birds, what we're finding with a lot of songbirds is over 95% of our songbirds, while they themselves eat seeds like we put out in our bird feeders every year as juveniles and adults, their young can't eat those. So the baby birds need insects, especially soft-bodied insects like caterpillars. And so we'll see those in a little bit. But I want to point out a couple issues. Birds, even though they have great vision, they can even see ultraviolet. Same with a lot of our insects. They see another range outside the visible light spectrum that we can see. They can't see windows. And so here is on the IU Northwest Campus, Merrim Hall, and they just smack into these windows. And when they run into the windows really fast, they break their necks. And one project that the Field Museum in Chicago does is people go out during every spring and fall migration, and they collect all the birds around the McCormick Center, and they take them over to the Field Museum, and they're cataloged and saved for future study. And here's just a tiny, tiny, tiny sample of some of those birds. And I bet if I looked at them, they'd all have broken necks. And so come spring migration very soon, I'll probably be seeing dead birds around these windows for these stairwells at Merrim Hall. And that brings up what happened just yesterday in Chicago. Again, another story of some of our local area interactions. So in Cook County, Carvana decided to put in one of those car towers that look really cool, you know, the car elevators. The problem is birds smack into them, and they're putting this right across from a forest preserve that is known for birds. And yesterday it got final approval, yesterday afternoon. So it's going in, they had to make some concessions. They're gonna wrap some things on the windows up to 63 point some feet tall, very specific, to try to prevent bird collisions. And they have to do a 1-year research study to see how many dead birds they find. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are there, but they did put in some concessions. It'd be better if the tower wasn't there, but it is going to be built. And my point is that even when you have a big group of people, which they did, when you have illustrations, you have examples, sometimes you lose the battle. But even if you lose a battle, no matter how hard you try, you've still formed a base, you've still formed a group. And so next time something comes up, you have more data. They'll have data from this Carvana tower in a couple years. And they'll have a base group of people they can reach out to try to prevent something else from happening. So win or lose, you got to look at in the long run, you got to look at these bigger pictures. And closer to us, though, is in Hammond, where there is a 4,000-year-old dune. And online you can find the Hessville Dune Dusters. They're trying to save this area. It's fairly degraded environmentally, but it is one of our old dune ridges. And they're trying to save it from being a overpass over the train tracks over in because if you've ever driven through that area in Hammond, you know that you can be stuck at those freight train tracks for a while. And this would actually go through this area, which is used primarily for recreation for neighboring areas. And they'd also like to bulldoze it down to put in some more housing and whatnot. And so this is another local story that people are trying to prevent happening. And so they're looking for volunteers. And I'll go out this summer to take some pictures. When you go on their website, you'll see other pictures that people have taken to kind of show the area and why it shouldn't be destroyed. And yeah, there's some recordings about, or I read what things like the mayor was saying to a young woman who was asking like why you really had to do this, and it was pretty brutal. But there's a link. All right, so here I go. So here's some pictures, except for this one, are from my yard. So these are birds I find in my yard. And I remember I said that these animals need to feed their young caterpillars mostly, and soft-bodied animals, soft-bodied insects. We're talking this nest that I'm showing in the corner. It's going to need thousands of caterpillars just for this one nest in order for those chicks to live. And these are just after hatching. Do not open bird boxes. This isn't a bird box at Arcelor Middle. Do not open them. Do not take pictures of the birds. You're disturbing them. I did this one for a specific reason and had this bird box open for about 30 seconds and just took some pictures with my phone. So I could zip it in really fast, take it out really fast and leave. And I knew that I wasn't going to be disturbing them that long. But if you disturb the nest, hang out by the nest too much, the parents may abandon it. So I just want to point out that even though I'm showing you one, don't do it unless you have a very specific goal. And so if we don't have these areas where caterpillars can grow, then you're not going to get these birds. And they're going to build nests, but they won't be able to raise their young. And that's why they're coming up here. Here's just a scattering, a tiny little selection of some of the caterpillars that I have in my yard. And all of these are caterpillars except for this one over here. And these are sawfly larvae, which are superficially a lot like caterpillars. Also from my yard though. And we need these things. And so some of these are going to turn into butterflies like black swallowtails down here. These are both black swallowtails. A lot of times caterpillars will change how they look depending on how old they are. But a lot of these are moths. Like here's an Io moth. It's a gorgeous caterpillar. And if you use pesticides, you use herbicides, you're not going to get these and you're not going to get the birds. And so you go like, I put up bird feeders. Why aren't the birds coming? It's because they can't nest. And this is why these birds are making that long journey, because of the abundant food source that was at least once here, but won't be in the future if we keep decreasing the amount of insects that we have here, which is why it's important to plant natives and look at that guide put out by Save the Dunes. But it's not just the birds. Here's some other animals from my yard. Got a lot of animals in my yard. The only one I didn't take in my yard and so again, because I like this picture better. This is actually the same species. It goes with this blue starry pattern in the winter and then changes to the red stripe on the back in the summer. This is the red-backed salamander. And I think they're really cool because these are a group of salamanders that do not have lungs. So the amphibians like salamanders and frogs breathe partially through their skin usually. This is only breathing through their skin. That's why frogs and stuff, they feel moist. It's because they need the moist surface for oxygen and CO2 to cross the skin. So that's why we have moist lungs. But I think it's cool. We have a lungless salamander, and it's just living in my courtyard. Well, this blue one down here is. And it's eating insects, it's eating snails and worms and everything else. Happy, fine old time. But you think like, oh, hey, you know what? Frogs will eat them. Possums, they love ticks, love possums, love ticks. My bats, and even animals you don't think about, like foxes or deer, they still eat insects. And I have a couple other pictures that just didn't make it on here, like groundhogs and coyotes. They'll eat insects also. They're a really high nutritious protein source. And without them, they're not, some of these animals may not, I wouldn't find them. I wouldn't have bats in my yard. I wouldn't, and some of these other animals like fox kits, they may not get enough nutrition if they couldn't supplement with other animals. Okay. So we're getting towards the end. Don't worry, only a few more slides. And just some things that are upcoming. So I'm also, which I forgot to mention earlier, I'm a research associate at the Field Museum. And one of the things pretty much the only thing I do there is I occasionally make field guides, which are available for free download. And so I'm just showing you page 1 of 2 of some of our native orchids that we find in our area. So I have, Indiana has over 40 native orchids and 1 non-native orchid, which is found right here. If you have an orchid in your yard, it's usually going to be this one, just to let you know. But it's really cool because people think you have to go far off crazy lands in order to find tons of orchids like the tropics or Hawaii. But I gotta tell you, we have way more orchids native to Indiana than are native to Hawaii, which is kind of cool. But here's just a few of them. There's a lot more found here in the Chicago region though. But we're going to be doing some more field guides. I'm updating the one currently for that arbuscular middle dune and swale. We'll probably put in some of those rare insects also into that field guide. I'm going to be doing another one where biomes collide. I'm thinking that's going to be my title. And so these are going to be on the plants and animals for where here in Chicago, we're at the edge of their range. And if you take an ecology class or a lot of science classes, you'll learn that all of these biomes or ecosystems meet here in the Chicago area. You got the northern forest, the eastern and southern forest. You got those prairies that we saw moving in on that map. And because of that, we get lots and lots and lots of plants and animals at the edge of their ranges. And I think it'll be really fun to put together a guide showing you all the ones at the edge of their range, so rare here in Chicago, as well as sadly some of the plants and animals that we've lost due to things like climate change, loss of habitat, pesticides, urbanization, things like that. So I'm going to be using photography to show that also. And we're also going to be doing a more user-friendly bee guide. You saw we have a lot of bees. I showed you a small, tiny fraction of them earlier, but it'll be nice to have an easy to use one. The ones they have now are kind of technical. In March, at the end of March, I'm going to be having a show just on insects at Red Cup Cafe in Chesterton. And I have a meeting on Monday with Save the Dunes and the Chesterton Art Center. We're going to be putting together an art show based on the guide. So we don't know when that's going to be yet. That's what we're meeting for on Monday. And when that happens, I'll be putting out that information, the new field guides. I'm also hoping to get a couple different grants, other stuff in the works. And there'll probably be a few guided hikes that we haven't decided on times yet for various organizations like Save the Dunes or Shirley Hines Land Trust, probably to photograph insects or plants, but nature photography hikes. And this is my last slide. Okay, it went a little bit longer than expected, but I'm still on time. So I saw we had a few people chatting. I was wondering what questions people may have had, because there are 8 things here in this chat box. Okay. All right, so Isa, oh wow, thank you, Isa. And let's see, looks like a rosin weed seed. So if we go back, I'm assuming we are way, 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 way back. to where I was scattering seeds. So let's go back. So yeah, there's probably some rosin. There's definitely some silphium seeds. It's kind of hard for me to tell rosin meat apart sometimes from other ones in the same genus. But these big clumps are pale purple coneflower, which is our native coneflower. We find a lot of times at the stores like Home Depot, Menards, it's purple coneflower, and it's usually some sort of cultivar, which is still better than not planting it. So, but pale purple coneflower is our native one. Let's see, love this. I'm a big gardener. Excellent, love to hear that. And people, I'm open to people asking questions to myself, or I can recommend other people that, or companies that can help with gardening, native gardening, if you're interested in them. And are those turkeys? Yes, wild turkeys. So when we look at all the, just a small smattering of some of the animals that were in my yard, some of the birds. And I'm not a big birder, but it's really easy because all I have to do is look out my window and I'll see turkeys. And this was part of a group of 20 that were in my yard once. They completely destroyed my corn. I was trying to grow corn one year. They turned it into a dust bath, which was sad. I didn't have any corn, but it was fascinating to watch them. And I actually was delayed once getting to work because I had a turkey blockage. I couldn't get through the turkeys in my driveway. Isn't that a weird one? Like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna be late to work today because of the turkeys, right? So that did happen though. I can honestly say that. And those are bluebirds, and those are eating mealworms. So if you want to attract bluebirds in the winter to your yard, they do like mealworms, which are stupidly expensive. But I think I understand why. You have to raise them, but they do like mealworms. And they're beautiful birds. I love yes, it's like, it's got the like superhero landing pose, which I thought was absolutely hysterical. And we have both red squirrels like this and gray squirrels in our yard, which is really fun to watch them because they don't like overlapping their territory, but they kind of collide in my yard. And so I definitely know what part of the yard I'll find gray squirrels and which part will belong to the red squirrels. So how do we access these guides? Okay, so thank you, Isa. So Isa from the Field Museum, by the way, she put up the guides for the Field Museum, and I was going to give Erin a list of some of these websites to put up. But if I type in, say, the Dunes Pollinator Guide, the Pollinator Guide will pop right up, and then you just click on a link and you get the PDF. Okay, the moth. I thought it looked like, oh, Rosa, oh, sorry, you thought the moth. My bad. I assumed we were looking at the seed page. And let's see. Yes, so maybe this middle moth picture. Yeah, so that's one that was actually just clinging onto my deck. So I've got a red stained deck. You can see a little bit of it there. Okay. All right, love the turkeys. Okay. So this is one from my class for extra credit. Thank you for coming, by the way. I haven't put the link up yet. I was too busy trying to finish getting this together, but I will get it up soon for my class. And one serious question regarding the bees. Last year I kept hearing about a killer bee. Killer bees are not here. So the killer bees were being found on, I believe, the Upper West Coast. They're not here. That's been another fascinating conservation story because they're worried that they're going to get a foothold here and just kind of like destroy a lot of things. And I didn't get into it. There is concern a lot of places with honeybees. Honeybees are not native. Honeybees are a weird bee. They're colonies and everything. They're European, Eurasian, how we like to call it. Combine them together. And one problem with them is they do have a lot of diseases. We keep hearing about colony hive collapses. And so there's evidence that they can transfer diseases to some of our native bees, causing them to decline. And we're seeing, again, we saw that there's some big decline in insects for these bees for a lot of reasons, our native bees. And there's so many of them that there's some evidence that when you put them out into our natural areas, that they're competing with our native bees for pollen. and that pollen is used to feed young bees, baby bees, because it's really high in proteins, which all animals need in order to live. And so baby bees, whether you're a bumblebee or a honeybee, you're eating pollen. And so there's some interactions there going on too, but we don't have the killer bees yet. We do have lots of invasive insects though. All right, keep going down. Thank you. Wondering about that. What would you suggest or advise someone who wants to commit to volunteering at preserves but has a busy schedule? How do you suggest they start to help conserve? So one of the things I'm going to be giving to Erin is a list of our local organizations, and one of the places in this 4 county area, because they have the, I always forget the county, the one that has South Bend in it. Shirley Hines Land Trust has preserves all over the place, and they've been very good in recent years about having work days both during the week and on the weekends at different times. And they do a variety of different types of volunteering. But there's also a bunch of other groups like Gibson Woods and Hammond has a Wild Ones chapter and things like that. And I thought, you know, I've done it before. I've been to these talks and they just have this whole list at the end of all these places, but you can't click on them. So you're trying to take a picture of a screen. And I figure we can just more easily send out a link, hopefully at the end. I got to tell Erin this. I didn't tell her that beforehand. But in the next couple of days, I'm hoping to get that out to everybody. But there's a ton of places to volunteer. And when you volunteer, you're learning about these natural areas and you're learning what you can do in your own backyard. Okay, what camera do you use? I use a lot of different cameras. I don't have any right next to me. Some of these are phone pictures. I did mention like the baby birds was a phone picture because that's the only way I could easily get in and out of that box really, really fast instead of with a big clunky real camera. But I do shoot Canon. And some of these, I'm using a variety of different lenses. And a lot of the really close ones are something called the MP5, which is it's a fairly technical manual lens. So you have to, I'm basically just rocking back and forth. Very little light gets through. You have to use the flash. And it's described as like a microscope on a camera. But since I like microscopes and I spent so many years working with microscopes, I had no trouble using this. But it's the one that's really easy to find used online because people have trouble with it. But that's one of the reasons why I might be doing some of these hikes this summer and showing how you can use different lenses as well as just your phone. These bigger insects, these bigger moths like this goldenrod stowaway moth or the beautiful nymph. I think this is a beautiful nymph moth, the one that looks like, very ironic because it looks like, you know, bird poo. You can take those with your cell phones quite easily. Or this lemon cuckoo bee, which I think is beautiful, could have been taken. This is with a real camera, but I could have easily taken this with a phone. And this one is at the end of my driveway in that area that I showed you. And this one up here, these things are so beautiful. These little bees. This is on a shrub that I planted a couple of years ago. So again, not only am I planting prairie plants, I'm planting shrubs, which are also talked about in the Save the Dunes guide. But yeah, I can put it. I can include a picture or two of what I look like when I have a bunch of camera equipment. I just look like a big, huge dork when I am out photographing things. So there's that lemon cuckoo bee also. And so, yeah, I'm thinking I have 1 or 2 pictures here of me. I've been trying to like collect all pictures of me that I have just because I'm always looking for pictures of me for various things when people ask me. But let's see. By the way, this was me taking pictures of honeybees. I'm just going to open up a couple things. So here's like one of the longer lenses that I've used for some of these shots. So I don't have to get too close because who wants to get stung by a bunch of honeybees? for example. No one wants that. Sorry, there's a lot of random pictures in here.
Susan, as you're looking for that picture, can I ask you a question? If you can hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned an app a little while back for identifying, and I couldn't catch what it was. Can you say it again? Was
Okay.
iScience?
So there are two. Yes. And so
Okay.
I'm going to send out 2 different sites, links to 2 different sites. One is iNaturalist, which is more broad. So here's iNaturalist, and it'll cover anything. If I take a picture of a fish, I can put it on here. An insect, a plant, a snail. I can put anything on here, and you're going to get suggestions. Okay. The other one that I use specifically for bugs is bugguide.net.
Okay.
And this is going to be populated more with scientists or naturalists that specifically know usually specific groups of insects, and you can put up requests for different ones. And so here's the most recent request from a bunch of random people. Okay, I'm not great at identifying bugs. I'm good at taking pictures of bugs, but I don't really know a ton of them. And so I'm using crowdsourcing basically to help me identify these organisms. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to be putting those out also. And I swear I had a really good one of me looking like a dork, but maybe I'm just not seeing it right away. And you guys don't need to see like 5,000 pictures of me. So let's see. I think we have a couple more chats. An app I use for identifying on my phone is Picture This and Grow It. I think I've heard of Grow It, but I haven't heard of Picture This. iNaturalist does have another program called Seek, which was designed for younger users, and it doesn't record GPS. So on iNaturalist, if I upload a picture and I have GPS turned on my phone or on my camera, it'll upload that also. And that gets hidden in the Seek program, and it's instant. I can just like run my camera over an image and it'll tell me, give me an idea of what it is. I don't really use that program, but I know a lot of people are liking it. So yeah, there's a ton of different apps. Okay. Did your dog have puppies in that picture? My dog is a boy dog, so he does not have puppies. But there may have been some pictures up there of puppies. My parents had puppies a couple of times, so it wouldn't be surprising. There was me with a bunch of puppies in one of those pictures. So, all right, other questions? This is my first time trying to do a conservation photography talk, so hopefully I did okay.
You did great. Thank you so much for joining us.
I've had fun.
Your pictures are gorgeous.
Thank you.
You said they're going to be up in Chesterton?
Yeah, so there's going to be a smaller show at Red Cup Cafe starting at the end of next month. I think a group of high school students is going up soon. Okay. And then it'll be me. And then we'll have a bunch at the Chesterton Art Center, date to be determined. Hopefully I'll know after Monday. And so if that's determined on Monday morning when we have our meeting, I'll be adding that into the information I give to Erin to send out to people.
Great. Will you put it out on your Instagram as well?
I will. And assuming something weird happened with my website when I was trying to update things, including with this talk last week. I'm hoping I can get back into it soon. I just have to deal with companies. And then it'll go up on my website also, as well as Facebook. So both on Instagram and Facebook, I'm Susan Kirt Photography. And I'm probably a little bit more active on Instagram.
And a couple requests for more talks are coming in on my text.
Oh, more requests for talks are coming in. Excellent. I have so much to talk about. It's crazy. Narrowing down the subject was horrible. And then I had to exclude things. For example, coming out the last couple of weeks, it was talking about how recent study has shown that about 30% of firefly species are declining. Over 30%. And my yard is just rife with lightning bugs. or fireflies, but they got caught. So there's all sorts of things to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and what you can do to help. So, and a big thing is plant natives. Don't no pesticide, no herbicides, or do it in controlled, limited fashion. And then you will get your insects and you'll get your birds, and then the plants can have their seeds, and the birds can disperse the seeds elsewhere. So.
No mow zones.
Oh, no mow zones are always good, right? There's nothing like going out to an area like, oh, it's so pretty, I'm gonna come back here tomorrow and take pictures, and then they mow it.
There's one last question about spelling your name for Instagram, your handle.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, because it does, yes, it is not Kirt, like Captain Kirt. I get that a lot. Susan Kirt. Oops. I can't even spell my name. So that's my handle at Instagram, and then same thing with Facebook. If you type in Susan Kirt Photography, you will find me. So, oh, and I direct message that. I'm so sorry. Ugh. So I direct message that to somebody, and now I'm trying to figure out. Anyways, so yeah, Susan Kirt Photography, K-I-R-T.
I think it's on the announcement.
Oh, and it's on the announcement from Erin. So, okay.
Take it away.
All right, Kathy, I give it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us. It's wonderful to think about all the flowers and the pollinators we're going to see in the spring soon, hopefully.
So soon.
And I look forward to looking at the guides that you created as well. So thank you.
Yes. So I'm looking forward to creating new ones this year.
Excellent.
I'm ready to go.
And thanks to everyone for joining us in our first speaker series event for the spring.
All right.
Good night.
All right. Night, everybody. Okay. Oh, and you can see little baby James. Woo. Yeah. So Erin came over to help watch baby James tonight. So.
No selfish on my part, but totally love it. Thank you, everyone. We gotta get him back to the house, James. Get him back to the house. Okay, now